Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are not just analyzing a text. We are effectively stepping into a time machine.
We really are.
Yeah. So I want you to close your eyes for a second. Unless you're driving, please do not do that. But if you can, just picture the date. It is December 5th, 1966.
A wildly volatile year. I mean, the ground was just shifting under everyone's feet.
Exactly. The space race is in full swing. The Vietnam War is escalating. And the counterculture is really just starting to boil over.
You have the Beatles in the studio recording Sprayed Pepper.
Changing music forever.
Right. And you have Timothy Leary telling everyone to turn on, turn in, and drop out. The whole world, or at least a loud part of it, is absolutely obsessed with expending consciousness.
And amidst all that global noise, the shouting, the protests, the music, we are zooming in on a very quiet, very snowy living room in Elmira, New York.
Elmira, yes.
We are with Jane Roberts and her husband, Ruburt.
Yeah.
And they are sitting down to conduct an experiment that sits right at the intersection of psychology, philosophy, and what we would call extrasensory perception.
It is a moment of quiet revolution, honestly.
It really is. But before we transport ourselves fully into that living room and see what they're up to, we have a very important housekeeping note to make. A mandatory declaration, if you will.
Right. Let us get the legalities and the ethics clear right up front.
Before we jump in, we need to declare that this podcast is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
We are here to analyze, to explore, and to learn. We are not here to sell you a subscription to the secrets of the universe.
Absolutely not. And to be very specific about our source material today, we are doing a deep dive into session 306 of the Early Sessions Book 7 of the Seth Material.
Recorded on December 5, 1966.
Yes. And we want to give full credit to the Seth Material and the publisher, the New Awareness Network, for preserving these documents.
It is so crucial to credit them because these archives are massive. We're talking about thousands of pages of dictated material.
Volumes and volumes.
And what we are looking at today with session 306, it is a perfect microcosm of that era. It is this weird, beautiful mix of high philosophy and lo-fi experimentation.
On one hand, you have Seth, the personality that Jane Roberts channeled, giving this incredibly high-level, almost academic breakdown of the psychedelic experience.
Deconstructing LSD, the ego, the nature of reality.
With the precision of a surgeon.
Absolutely.
And then, in the literal next breath, you have this gritty parlor game-style experiment where Jane is trying to guess what is inside a sealed double envelope.
High concept meets guess the card.
And a quick spoiler alert for everyone listening. What she finds inside that envelope, or rather what she sees without using her physical eyes, is chillingly accurate.
It is.
It is one of those things that just makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
It is one of those rare moments where the rubber truly meets the road. You have the theoretical framework of expanded consciousness, and then you have the practical proof of concept, all happening within a single hour.
So let us set the stage here. Jane Roberts is in a trance state. She is pacing the room, speaking as Seth. Rob Butts is sitting there with his pen and paper, taking verbatim notes in his own shorthand.
Which was their standard operating procedure.
Right. And the session actually kicks off with a reference to what Jane had been reading earlier that day. She had been reading about drugs.
Which, as we said, in late 1966 was unavoidable.
You could not escape it.
If you were reading the news or Time magazine, you were reading about LSD, it was the topic du jour.
But Seth takes this opportunity to pivot. He does not give a moral lecture.
No, he does not.
He does not say drugs are bad or drugs are good. Instead, he uses the topic of drugs to launch into a deeply structural conversation about how we perceive reality itself.
He introduces this concept of imprinting.
Imprinting, yes. Let us unpack that. Because when I hear the word imprinting, I immediately think of a baby duck following the first thing it sees.
Right. The biological imprinting.
Maybe a Twilight stereotype.
Yeah, but Seth is using it in more of a physics sense, almost. He is talking about how consciousness focuses itself.
Okay, so how does Seth define it here in the text?
He explains that the physical world, this table, your microphone, the walls of the room, the traffic outside it, is not the only reality. It is just the one we are currently focused on. He compares imprinting to tuning into a station.
I love that analogy because it is so incredibly intuitive. It is like Right now, we are all watching Channel Earth.
Exactly. We are imprinted on this specific frequency. Our biological equipment, our eyes, ears, nerves, they are the antenna designed to pick up this exact station.
And because we are tuned to Channel Earth, the picture is clear, the sound is crisp, and it feels like the only show on TV.
It feels solid.
It feels absolute.
Yeah.
But Seth is implying that just because we are tuned to Channel 4, it does not mean Channel 5 or Channel 88 or Channel Dimension X do not exist.
Precisely. Let me quote the source directly here. Seth says, existence within any system will necessitate some imprinting. The imprinting simply involves an adjustment whereby consciousness is attuned to a particular station, so to speak.
An adjustment. That is a very interesting word choice.
It is.
It implies that our natural state is not focused here. We have to be adjusted to fit, like we have to be calibrated down to this physical level.
Think of it like a VR headset.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Right. If you put on a high-end VR headset, you are imprinted on the game world. You see the game, you hear the game. You temporarily forget about the physical living room you're actually standing in.
Because the adjustment is the headset itself.
Yes.
So our physical bodies, our brains, our sensory organs, they are the headset.
In a way, yes, they act as filters. They actually block out all the other data, the other dimensions, the other realities. They block it all out so we can focus solely on this one.
Imprinting is a focusing mechanism.
Without it, we would just be overwhelmed by too much data. We would not be able to function here.
So we are here to play the game. We are here to experience physical matter, to feel gravity, to taste food. We need the blinders to do that.
Right. And this leads directly into the next big concept Seth introduces in this session, which is his definition of the ego.
Oh boy, the ego. Now this is a heavily loaded term.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in 1966, but even today in spiritual circles.
It is almost a dirty word in some ashrams.
The narrative is usually that the ego is the villain. The ego is the enemy. Kill the ego. That is the mantra, right?
That is the standard New Age take, for sure. You have to dissolve your ego to reach enlightenment. You have to stop being you.
But Seth takes a very different, very practical approach here.
He does. He defines the ego simply as that portion of the self that is imprinted for this specific reality.
So the ego is the user interface.
That is a perfect way to put it. It is the interface. It is the part of you that knows how to drive a car, pay taxes, distinguish between a red light and a green light.
It handles the data from Channel Earth.
Yes.
So if we go back to the VR analogy, the ego is the avatar.
Yes, exactly.
The ego is the character on the screen. It thinks the game is real. It is worried about its health points. It is worried about collecting coins. It is worried about what the other avatars think of it. That is its job.
But, and here's where Seth really blows the doors off the whole thing. He says that while the ego is focused here, there is a whole self that is much, much larger.
This is the part that really struck me when reviewing the material. Seth suggests that this psychological structure, the real you, is aware of huge portions of itself that are not imprinted on physical reality.
He gives a fascinating example in the text to illustrate this.
Okay.
He says, imagine an individual who is aware simultaneously of all their incarnations within the physical system.
Wait, slow down. All their incarnations.
Yes, past, present, future.
All at once.
Seth implies that from the perspective of the whole self, time does not work the way we think it does. It is not linear. It is simultaneous.
So the whole self sees the entire timeline at once, like looking at a film strip laid out on a table.
Exactly. He says this whole self is aware of these lives happening all at once, and yet it retains its own identity as the whole who is experiencing these separate lives.
That is incredibly hard to wrap your head around.
It is a massive concept, but go back to your video game analogy. It works perfectly.
Okay, let us try it. So the ego is the avatar running around in the jungle level.
Right. And the whole self is the player sitting on the couch holding the controller. The player is aware of the game, yes, but the player is also aware of the living room, the smell of pizza in the kitchen, the cat walking by, and maybe a text message coming in on their phone.
The player has a panoramic view.
Exactly. And the player might be playing 3 different games on 3 different screens. Or they might have played the game before and already know what is coming.
The ultimate multitasker.
Seth calls these advanced personality structures. He says they organize the basic ground reality into many patterns and then operate and manipulate within them.
And most of us, humanity at this current stage, we're only aware of the avatar.
We have forgotten about the player on the couch.
We are so deep in the game, so completely imprinted, that we think the jungle level is the only thing that exists anywhere.
Generally, yes. We identify completely with the station we are tuned to, and Seth argues that is okay. That is the entire point of the system.
You are supposed to be immersed.
Right. You are supposed to be immersed, but you should not mistake the immersion for the totality of who you are.
Now, before we get into the LSD stuff, which connects directly to this idea of breaking the immersion, there was a little aside Seth made about the nature of God that made me laugh out loud.
Oh, about human God.
Yeah. It was just his casual takedown of thousands of years of theology. Just a drive-by philosophy shooting.
He really does not pull his punches.
Yeah.
He argues that our concept of God is insignificant because it is based entirely on our own root assumptions.
He says, and I am paraphrasing a bit here, taking your own physical system and its physical universe, all intelligent life is simply not humanoid.
Which is a bold statement for 1966. I mean, we had not even landed on the moon yet. The idea of non-human intelligence was strictly Pulp Fiction.
I have always said this about sci-fi movies. Why do aliens always look like humans with slightly different foreheads?
Or blue skin.
Right. It is always 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head.
Well, in movies, it is a budget issue. You have to put a human actor in a rubber suit.
Sure.
But in theology, Seth argues it is a failure of imagination. It is sheer vanity.
Exactly. We look in the mirror, we see a human, and we say, well, God must look exactly like this.
And Seth is saying that is ridiculous.
If the universe is filled with consciousness that is not humanoid, why would the creator be a human with a beard sitting on a cloud?
It connects right back to that idea of imprinting. We imprint the idea of human onto everything. We anthropomorphize the weather, animals, and the divine.
We filter God through channel Earth.
Yes, and Seth says if we could change the channel or lift the imprinting, we would see a much vaster, stranger reality where God is an energy or a force, not a person.
It is a very humbling thought. We are not the center of the universe. We are just the center of our own channel.
Which brings us perfectly to the topic of the day in 1966. Psychedelics. LSD. The magic mushroom. The chemical method of lifting the imprinting.
Right, because if imprinting is the filter, drugs were seen as the solvent.
Now, the context here is vital for you to understand. We have to remember who Jane and Rob were. They were not hippies.
They were not living in a commune in San Francisco.
No, they were pretty straight-laced. They lived in a quiet neighborhood in Elmira. They drank coffee. Rob liked a beer, but they were not part of the drug culture.
But they were surrounded by the noise of it.
The media was screaming that drugs were the only way to true enlightenment.
So Seth weighs in. And what is really interesting is that he does not do the just say no thing. He does not sound like a school principal or a government PSA.
But he also does not sound like Timothy Leary.
No, he walks a very nuanced middle path. Seth explains that drugs like LSD do structurally affect the imprinting process. They momentarily stop that tuning mechanism we talked about, so the static clears. Or the VR headset comes off.
The filter is removed, or at least suspended. Seth says you will see with new inner eyes. To some extent, you will view some aspects of reality apart from the usual physical structures that you impose upon it.
That sounds intense.
It is intense. He says it can lead to a feeling of oneness with all that is.
He admits this is a meaningful breakthrough for people who are stuck in their egos.
It shakes them up. It shows them the walls of the box are not actually solid.
So he validates the experience. He says, yes, you are seeing something real. You are not just hallucinating random colors.
He does. But, and there is always a but with Seth.
There's a big but. And it centers on a specific phrase he repeats quite a bit in this session. Of itself.
Of itself. That is the key limitation.
Explain that for us. What does he mean by that?
He says, of itself, it will not carry you further than this. He argues that drugs can show you the nature of the system you are in. They can show you the physical world as it truly is, energy, vibration, consciousness.
But they cannot transport you out of the system.
That is the crucial point.
So, going back to my house analogy.
Yeah.
Taking LSD turns on the stadium lights inside the room. You can suddenly see the floorboards, the wiring behind the drywall, the microscopic dust in the corner. You see the room perfectly.
Yes.
But it does not open the door so you can leave the house.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. Seth says it does not give you psychological mobility. It does not give you natural insight into past lives or other dimensions. It just strips the veneer off this dimension.
It is a sightseeing tour of the engine room. It is not a ticket to a new vessel.
Exactly. And this leads directly to the danger Seth highlights. And note, he is not talking about a physical danger, like frying your brain cells or jumping out a window.
He is talking about a psychological danger involving the ego.
Right, because if you forcibly lift the imprinting, The ego, which is designed specifically for the imprinting, gets very confused.
Worse, it gets left behind entirely.
Seth points out that in the drug experience, the ego is often excluded. The chemical forces the expansion, and the ego is shoved aside. It is kicked right out of the driver's seat.
And we established earlier, the ego is the interface. It is the translator.
Yes. And this is the crux of Seth's argument. If you go on this massive cosmic trip, see the face of God and dissolve into the universe, but you leave your ego at the door, when you come back down, you have no way to integrate that experience.
It is like going to a brilliant lecture on quantum physics in a language you do not speak without your interpreter. You might see some really cool slides, but you will not learn anything you can use.
Precisely. Seth says it is precisely because the ego is excluded from the psychedelic experience with drugs that difficulties are encountered afterward.
So you come back to your normal life, and your ego is like, what just happened? I have no files for this. I do not know how to process this data.
And that can lead to dissociation or depression or just a lingering sense of none of this matters because the ego was not part of the journey. It creates a split in the self.
So what is the alternative? If we are not supposed to drug the ego into submission, what are we supposed to do with it?
Seth says the goal is to train it.
We are bringing the ego inward. That is the exact quote.
Yes. He wants us to expand consciousness to include the ego. To make the ego flexible enough to say, okay, I can step back a little, I can let more weird beta in, but I am still here to take notes and make sense of it.
I really like that approach. It is so much more compassionate to the self than the usual rhetoric.
Yes,
it's like saying, do not fire your manager, just send him to a better training seminar.
Yes, exactly. Train the manager to handle a bigger department. A flexible ego allows you to bring the mystic experience back into your daily life and actually use it.
Otherwise, it is just a memory of a crazy Tuesday night.
It turns the supernatural into the practical.
And that is Seth's mission, to make this stuff usable for everyday people. So we have got this heavy philosophical framework laid out. Reality is a station. The ego is our receiver and our translator. Drugs scramble the receiver, but they do not permanently upgrade it.
Correct. That is the theory.
And then the session takes a hard left turn.
It certainly does. It goes from the cosmos straight to the kitchen table.
Seth basically stops talking about the nature of God and asks, do you have an envelope for me?
It is time for the test.
This is the 79th envelope experiment. For those listening who might not know, Rob and Jane did these tests regularly to see if Jane, while in trance as Seth, could describe what was inside a sealed envelope.
And we should really emphasize that the setup was rigorous. Rob would create a target object, usually a drawing or a note, and seal it in double envelopes, and Jane had never seen it.
Rob was essentially playing the role of the skeptical scientist in his own living room.
So let us talk about the object Rob created for this specific session, because honestly, it is hilarious. It is not serious at all.
It is not. It was not a sacred geometric shape. It was not a Bible verse or a profound quote. It was a joke. Rob had drawn a mock postage stamp.
A fake stamp?
A fake stamp, spooking his coworker. A young guy named Don Wilbur, who they apparently called Young Donny.
And Rob admits in the notes this was not a flattering portrait.
Not at all. He describes it as having red eyeballs and unbeautiful features. It was a caricature, basically a disaster of a drawing.
So inside this sealed double envelope is a bad drawing of a guy named Don, designed to look like a 1-cent stamp. It is a doodle.
Correct. Now, Jane or Seth takes the envelope, she holds it to her forehead, and she starts rattling off impressions. And this is where it gets really fun.
Let us go through the hits, because this is where the spooky factor comes in. It is one thing to talk abstractly about consciousness. It is another to see it read a sealed letter.
Let us look at the data. First, Seth mentions a string of numbers or 4 separate indications.
The stamp said 1 cent on the left and 1 cent on the right. Numbers, check.
Then Seth says, connection with a picture.
It was a drawing, check.
Then he says, a rectangle and a square. Perhaps the square within the rectangle.
Now stop right there. That is incredibly specific.
It is. Looking at the source image provided in the session notes, Rob had physically pasted a smaller square piece of paper onto a larger rectangular piece to make the stamp.
So structurally, it was literally a square pasted within a rectangle.
That is geometric precision. That is not a wild guess. That is seeing the physical structure of the paper inside the envelope.
It is like an X-ray.
Then Seth says, connection with the mails and postmark.
Boom! It is a postage stamp.
And he follows up with federal building or monument.
This is interesting logic. Seth is sensing the concept of postage stamp. What is usually on a postage stamp? Presidents, monuments, federal buildings. The association is perfect.
Right. The mind or the telepathic receiver is grasping for the concept of the stamp. It is pulling up associated images from general knowledge to try and describe the feeling.
And then he says USA.
The drawing literally had the letters US on it. It said 1 cent US postage.
Okay, that is direct reading. That is reading text through 2 layers of opaque paper.
Then we get into the associative hits, which I actually find even more fascinating than the literal ones. Seth mentions dissonance and indications of disaster.
Because it was a bad drawing.
Exactly. Rob notes that he purposely made it dissonant and unbeautiful. Seth picked up on the intent of the artist. The emotional flavor of the drawing was disaster.
Seth was basically acting like an art critic. I am getting a sense of disaster. That is hysterical.
But then we get the most complex hit of the whole night. This is the one that really shows us how telepathy works under the hood. Seth mentions a name.
He says, I do not believe the following is precisely correct here. Something like Toddle or Turtle, perhaps having to do with a name or address.
Toddle or turtle?
Now remember, the drawing is of Don Wilbur. Don Wilbur has a wife. Her name is Marilyn.
Okay, so where does toddle come from?
Jane Roberts, in her normal waking life, went to high school with a girl named Marilyn. Marilyn Tuttle. So look at the chain of transmission here. It is like a game of telephone played inside the brain.
Walk me through it, because this is wild.
The target is Don. Associated with Don is his wife, Marilyn. The telepathic signal picks up the concept, or the name, Marilyn. Dane's subconscious mind grabs that signal and frantically looks for a match in her own memory files.
It searches the database.
Right. It says Marilyn. Do we have a Marilyn? Yes, we have a Marilyn Tuttle.
So Seth verbalizes toddle or turtle.
That is a masterclass in the mechanics of perception. Telepathy is not a fax machine. It is a game of charades played inside a library. The signal has to be interpreted through the receiver's personal database.
And Seth, being the advanced consciousness, even qualifies it. He says, I do not believe the following is precisely correct. He knows the translator is getting it slightly wrong.
That is the nuance that makes this material so compelling to me. If it were a parlor trick, if it were fake, you would just guess Meryl.
Or you would just guess Dawn.
Right. But the hesitation, the sounds like, the self-correction that mimics the actual messy process of translating raw non-physical data into physical words.
And there was one more detail about the red eyeballs that I loved.
Oh, right. Seth mentions a small, round form that seems to be like a postmark or a vaccination mark.
And Rob had drawn these crazy, round, red eyeballs on Dawn. And if you think about an old vaccination mark, that small, round, red scar people used to have on their arms.
It is a visual rhyme. A small red circle. The mind sees small red circle on the hidden drawing and interprets it as vaccination mark or cancellation stamp. Again, it is pure association.
It is incredible. You have this profound, universe-bending philosophy about the ego and God, and then 10 minutes later you are remotely viewing a cartoon of young Donny with red eyes.
But they are connected. That is the whole point of the session.
As so.
The inner senses that allow Jane to see inside that sealed envelope are the exact same senses that, when fully developed and integrated with the ego, allow us to perceive the whole self and the greater reality Seth was talking about.
The envelope experiment is the proof of concept for the philosophy.
Exactly. It demonstrates that we are not locked in the room. We are not just the ego imprinted on channel Earth. We can peek inside the envelope. We can change the channel.
We are not stuck in the headset.
Mm.
We can lift the visor.
We can, but taking Seth's advice here, we should probably bring our ego along for the ride so we can accurately describe what we saw when we take the headset off.
Ideally, yes. We want to be able to write it down afterwards and make sense of it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, today? We are not all trance mediums. We are not all taking psychedelics in 1966.
I think the takeaway is about the flexibility of the mind. Seth is telling us that our limitation, this feeling of being just me, just this physical body, is an artificial construct, a highly useful fiction.
It is the user interface, not the user.
Right. And we can play with that interface. We can train it. We do not have to break it with drugs to experience something more. We can use intuition. We can pay attention to our dreams. We can try to bring the ego inward.
It is about listening to that quiet voice that knows what is inside the envelope, even if your logical brain says, that is impossible.
It is empowering. It means we are more than we think we are. It means the game is bigger than the screen.
Always.
Now, we have merely scratched the surface of this single session. There are volumes, literally books and books of this material.
If what we discussed today sparked any curiosity, we strongly encourage you to go to the source. Do not just take our word for it. Read the actual words.
You can find the Seth material, including the early sessions, at the New Awareness Network website. That is sethcenter.com/the early session Cs. Support the publishers who keep this incredible archive alive. It is a treasure trove.
And remember, Seth always emphasized that you are the final authority on your own reality. Read the material. Test it against your own experience. Do not be a follower. Be an explorer.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a thought. We talked a lot about the ego as a translator today. How many times have you had a gut feeling or a hunch or a vivid dream that you could not quite put into words? You just felt something profound.
And maybe you dismissed it because it did not make logical sense.
Exactly. But maybe that was not nonsense. Maybe that was your inner self speaking clearly, and your ego simply lacked the vocabulary to translate it. Maybe the goal of our lives is not to silence the ego, but to teach it a new language.
A language that includes the irrational, the intuitive, and the impossible.
Something to mull over until next time. Catch you on the next deep dive.